So welcome to the Adventurous Ageing Podcast, Rosie. You've had a very long career of very varied things and were editor-in-chief of Hello magazine before you set up Rosie's Reinvention retreats and became a life coach. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you now refer to as your breakthrough moment, but for many women listening to this might really resonate with you as a kind of burnout.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Rachel. Really nice to be here. And I love the name of this podcast because I think adventure was probably at the heart of my own reinvention journey. As you said, I've worked for a long time in women's magazines, pretty much my whole career, 25 plus years now. I'm now 50. And a lot of that time was spent as editor and editor-in-chief of Hello magazine, where I worked for 16 years, so a huge part of my working life. But in that time, I became a mum, and our strengths and our needs and our values sort of evolve. So for me, it reached a point a few years ago now in 2022 where I woke up one morning. I think I'd probably been running on adrenaline for a number of years in my career. Obviously, working in the media world, the landscape has changed so much, and we'd gone from being a predominantly print title to a multi-platform title, effectively available to your audience 24/7. And my role as the editor within that had evolved significantly. I was hosting a podcast, hosting a number of events, involved with commercial as well as editorial, but still putting a magazine to press every single Friday and overseeing a monthly magazine. I mean, as well as managing a team and all the demands of restructuring and the management of the culture and people that were within my teams in editorial. So it reached a point where it just became untenable. And I realize now, looking back with the training that I've done as a coach and the new life that I've created, a lot of that was because my values had shifted and I was out of alignment with who I am now and the things that were really important to me. So it was a real shock to my system when it happened, and I ended up having to have a stretch off work. It was 6 weeks in the end, which isn't a huge amount in the scheme of life. And lots of people that tip into full burnout are actually away from work for months, even longer. And it can be really debilitating. Some end up in hospital and the nervous system is severely impacted. For me, I feel really lucky that I caught it as I was tipping into burnout. The doctors that I saw actually diagnosed me with psychological exhaustion, which is kind of one step before burnout, because I still felt I was capable in lots of areas in my life. But my nervous system just couldn't keep up with this frenetic pace anymore. And most of all, the thing that I really kind of got to me, which is why I'm finding it so hard at the moment with lots of rhetoric around, how women should be to be successful in the workplace, was my big role as a mother, feeling that pull of wanting to be around more for my growing children, who were then aged 9 and 7. They're now 12 and 10. And I just didn't feel that I was able to be the mum that I wanted to be for this chapter of our lives. But for me, it meant taking time out of work and really getting to grips with not trying to fit myself into another job description or have the traditional HR conversation, which is when you end up begging for more flexible work or a pay rise to counteract the fact that you feel so stressed, but actually looking at me, the individual, and who I am now, what's important to me, and how can I build a life that's more in tune with that. So more authentic way to live, but still earn the money that I needed to earn to, support family. Lots of us have got mortgages to pay and the cost of living's rising. So everything that I do around reinvention is very much rooted in reality. But I felt that perhaps instead of a crisis, maybe I was just ready to reinvent. And this was actually my calling, if I listened to that little voice.
And how difficult was that though? Because, you hear that a lot, because if you're driven, really, you're used to being successful and getting to the top. It's hard to step back from that and not feel like, am I losing my drive, or am I somehow lacking or losing something?
Well, it is until your well-being begins affected, and then you really have to stop and think, well, ideally before your well-being is being affected, but we all have that little voice in our head saying, I don't know if this is working for me in quite the same way that it once did. And I think when your identity is very aligned with a role, a job that maybe you've had for a long time, or an identity as a mother, or whatever you've been doing for a large portion of your life, then you really need to stop and assess what success actually means to you. And it's a really lovely little exercise to just do, actually. It's something everybody listening to this podcast could do. Just try and write in a few sentences what the word success means to you. And you can apply that to your career or a specific area of your life if that's a part that you feel needs some attention. But for me, that idea of success meant having greater freedom, not being an employee. Reinvention isn't starting from scratch. It was taking all of that wisdom and everything I've learned in all of those years in the roles that I've done and all the experience that I bring with me into my next chapter, but really looking at, what success means to me and how can I create a life based on the things that bring me joy, the freedom that I'm craving to be around more for my family. How can I step into my power effectively and level things up even further? So for me, it didn't feel like a step back.
And was there any kind of fear around that? Because I think as you get older as well, there's like, well, I've only got so many years. What if I go down the wrong path and I've spent a number of years going down the wrong way?
The reinvention didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a case of, and I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we all just jack in the jobs that are not fulfilling us on a deeper level anymore, because that would be madness. And for lots of people, the financial situation makes that impossible to kind of consider as an overnight project. So it took me 2 years to finally leave Hello, but it meant opening up more honest conversations with the workplace and my boss, who I was lucky enough to have formed a strong relationship with, having worked there for such a long time. And I was able to communicate with him that, look, my well-being was beginning to suffer. I was having to take note of this. And from being somebody that was the perennial yes person who never really took a day off, that was a real shock for all of us, I think, to see it had got to this point where it was untenable. And then I was able to sort of segue my way out of Hello. I negotiated a new role where I worked 3 days a week for Hello, and on the side I trained to be a coach. So I did that remotely in half a day a week to get that qualification. I didn't know where it was going to lead at the time, but I felt a yearning to explore it and to learn something new again. Honestly, learning as a 50-something-year-old woman is such a different experience to the learning that we did, at school. The last time I'd learned anything was during the history degree, a long time ago, and then my levels. And it's very, very different when you choose the subject and it really is a passion. So I loved everything about that coaching course, and it did make me feel like actually this is a natural next step from what I've been doing. I mean, I kind of see myself as a storyteller as much as a coach. So my coaching style is rooted in storytelling and journalism and media experience to an extent, because I help women now challenge the narratives that they might have been telling themselves about themselves for a really long time, but which aren't true anymore. Like that narrative I was telling myself that I was a magazine editor and that was it, to challenge that and look at the person and encourage them to dig deep and ask themselves some of those big questions about what this life is for. What are their strengths? What do they want to create in this world? What is their legacy going to be? So, and then I did a year, 3 days a week at Hello, and then a further year on just 1 day a week. And by that point, I was kind of already doing the new thing. I was already starting to monetize it. So you have to root your reinvention journey in reality, and that takes planning. And it isn't necessarily going to happen overnight. But if you want it enough and you're taking small incremental steps forward, week by week, month by month, you will build that new life.
I saw something on your website actually about pause, reflect, and organise. I think a lot of women have a real problem with pausing because everything's like,
absolutely,
I optimise my time and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z all at the same time because that's what I'm so good at doing. And they don't have time to actually pause to think, what am I even interested in anymore?
You're so right. And the pause is absolutely the critical first step. And for me, that pause was kind of brought on by, my well-being taking a turn. But we all have the ability to build even micro pause moments into our days and our weeks. And that's when you take stock of where you're at now without rushing to fix it, importantly.
Yeah.
Just acknowledging those feelings. So looking back, if I had been able to have a few more pause moments built into my working weeks, maybe it wouldn't have reached that point if I'd had a few more pause moments where I was able to acknowledge that sense of feeling like, I think I want to do something else and I'm not making inroads. So really the retreats that I've create, that pause moment. Busy women really can be completely game changing. It's amazing how much we pack into one day. And that pro method, which is what I call it, the pause, reflect, organize, or reinvent like a pro. I've written a whole book on this subject. It's going to be called the Pro Method. It's coming out this summer. And that pause, reflect, organize framework forms the basis of all of our retreats. And it's rooted in neuroscience. And it really is kind of the 3 critical stages you need to go through if you want to see some lasting transformation in your life. I have it engraved on my bracelet. Yeah, I've got pause, reflect, organize engraved on there because I have to remind myself sometimes.
I was just going to ask you that because I've worked on celebrity magazines. It's usually just non-stop all the time. So you're obviously, however many years you work there, that kind of gets a little bit ingrained about working in that kind of way. And you're really busy too, I can imagine. How do you maintain your boundaries to make sure that those boundaries don't get crushed again?
Well, I protect the pause and reflect stage as much as the organized stage. So I think you have to be aware of how best you hold yourself accountable to do the things you really want to do. I'm a real diary planner. I have my diary on my phone and my, all connected through Google Calendar, and I actually now put into my diary thrive time and the pause and the reflect. That is time that I know in order to go into organize and get stuff done. And we all like ticking things off our to-do list. But if I haven't spent adequate time in those 2 phases, then I'm not going to achieve actually the outcome that I want. Yeah. So it's counterproductive to bypass them. We have got so much more energy for all the things that really bring us joy and success and, value in our lives if we have enough time to properly, calmly and gain some clarity into how to do that thing. Yeah. And we can't do that by rushing straight into the organised phase.
Yeah, totally. And I want to ask you a little bit more about, what your concept of midlife is. Because we're living longer now. I am there from about 40 to 70, crazy now, which means we're now transitioning into that era where women who are senior leaders begin to retire. And then that creates a whole other narrative about what does retirement and aging for a woman, which is, around this podcast, mean and look like nowadays.
Yeah, well, I'd like to think I'll never retire. I think when you're living your values and you're living your passion, then that is just your lifestyle. And I'm lucky now to have created a working life that's filled with, that's busy, but it's joyful. And I'm not tipping into stress or burnout because I know I'm hitting my values. I've actually got them written here. They're on a Post-it note on my desk. Because I know that whenever a piece of work or an opportunity comes in, I can do a quick look at my values. Does this align? And my values I've written on here. So my values are freedom, inspiring others, creativity, family, and communication. So if a piece of work comes in and I might immediately think, oh God, well, that's a good fee. And, oh, they want me. And I can immediately separate what's ego driven and what is actually going to, be meaningful and purposeful. And, family is a big one on there. And if that thing might mean I need to be away for 2 or 3 nights in a week, away from my kids, then I need to be really sure that it's hitting all other values because it's not hitting the family one. And I've made that commitment to want to be around for those times. So I think, that all comes from coaching. It was very transformative for me, and it is a really great thing that I recommend, which is again why I've created these day retreats, which are coaching led. So you get access to the top coaches in their fields. I've got an amazing little black book from all those years. I bring to the table all of these different experts in fields, and you get to share in their wisdom, and you actually do the work. You know, we don't just talk about values, we work out our values. You know, we do that exercise. So you don't think, oh, I'll just do that at some point when I get home. We do it in the room so that you leave feeling a little like you've taken that first step and now you're on a journey.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting you've got your values written down, because I think that's an interesting point, isn't it? You think, you know, everyone knows their values, but it's actually really easy to forget in the rush of life, like what they are and what you want to hold on to.
Absolutely, yeah. And we journaling, I mean, we give everybody has a notepad, and that is proven when you journal your goals, you're 42% more likely to actually live them and achieve them. So having things written down like that does make a big difference, and again helps with that accountability piece. Yeah.
And what three would you be able to say, have three tips for anybody who's, you know, who's feeling stuck, who's aware that like something's off, but don't quite know how to like stop and figure out their next step?
Remember the PRO method. So first of all, just pause. If you're feeling stuck, acknowledge that feeling, and maybe a little bit of journaling around how you feel now as a first step, without rushing to fix it or thinking, you know, why you've got to solve this and what you're going to do about it. Just acknowledge that, because you are valid, you know. And often I think for women there can be a lot of guilt around half of me, you know, that internal voice can be our worst enemy at times. And half of me, when I was having my crisis and off work, was thinking, this is ridiculous. I just edit a glossy magazine. I need to just pull myself together and get on with it. And that feeling actually prevents lots of women. It's not helpful, and it prevents lots of women from seeking the support that they need, because you are valid in your feelings. If it's having an impact on you and the life that you're leading and the decisions you're making, then you are absolutely valid to be feeling like that and to be feeling as though you need a little bit of extra support. So just acknowledging those feelings and pausing as a first step. Just taking a breath. Often, you know, we can calm our nervous system very simply with a few deep breaths to calm. And then I'd go into reflect mode as a second point. And again, you can do this easily by journaling. And that's all about naming those emotions and getting really curious about what could be going on here. And doing that with compassion, as though you are talking to a friend who's come to you saying, I feel absolutely exhausted and I'm on the floor. And well, you wouldn't say to them, just pull yourself together and get on with it, would you? You'd say, that must be really hard for you. You know, I really feel for you. What could be at the root of this? And so get curious, ask yourself lots of questions, beginning with what. And then when you've done enough sort of reflection around that, so a bit of an understanding, and it might be that, as I said to myself, look, you've been doing something for a really long time. It's natural that you might be thinking, I need a change. Your kids are reaching a certain age where actually, instead of needing me less around the home, I think they need me more as they enter their teenage years. And I want to be there for it. I don't want that constant push-pull. So getting curious around it, doing all the reflection, again, without rushing to fix it. And then you'll instinctively know when you've done enough reflection around that. And you can do that simply in sort of 5 minutes. Or for some people, they might need a longer period of time to be in reflect. And in a way, that takes the pressure off as well from having to fix something immediately and go straight into action. Like with me and my changing of my career, part of my reflection was doing a coaching course and being coached without thinking, oh, I'm going to just leave this career now and become a coach. You know, I didn't know where that journey was going to end actually, but I held myself in reflect for a period of time to figure it out. It's be amazing what time does. We need ideas to percolate. All the best things come from some percolation, don't they? Not just my coffee that I have in the morning or a fine wine. I think our brains need that as well. So in reflect mode for as long as you need to be there, and then you're ready to move into organize. And organize is thinking, right, what are some steps forward that I can take? What are my goals going to look like around this? And perhaps a bit of visualization I found it really helpful to consider, visualizing myself in a couple of years' time. And I feel like my career's flying and I'm really enjoying it and I'm fulfilling all of my values. And that for me meant running my own company in a space where I was supporting other women to help reinvent their lives. And perhaps for the first time using my own story instead of being the conduit of other people's stories, which I'd been for the whole career. Maybe it was time to step into my own, and to actually use that instead of keeping up this image of perfection. I was just done with that.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to uphold a brand any longer because I was free.
Yeah.
So I could actually be honest, and actually becoming honest about my own story really did set me off on this path, because the response that I saw, across my social media platforms and in response to articles and interviews that I did was overwhelming. Thousands of women contacting me saying they felt seen and felt exactly the same way.
And then talking about adventurous aging, what does that mean to you, and how do you hope you'll be aging adventurously?
Yeah, well, I think for me, it doesn't mean any great, huge things. Like, it doesn't mean like doing a bungee jump. And although I am actually enjoying pushing myself a bit in terms of physical exercise, I did a hike recently, which made me feel I wanted to be stronger than ever. It was just strong sort of mentally as well as physically, and strong in the choices that I'm making. But I think the idea of adventure for me means being free and being authentic to yourself, like really knowing who you are at this stage of life is so empowering. It means you're less susceptible to comparison, which can be the death of joy for so many of us. So for me, yeah, adventurous aging means stepping into the next chapters with power.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Adventurous Ageing Podcast with all your insights.
You're welcome. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.